The year is 146 BC. Roman soldiers stand in the ruins of Carthage, watching their greatest rival civilization burn to ash. For over a century, these two powers fought for control of the Mediterranean. Now Carthage is gone, forever. Rome stands alone. But 3 centuries earlier, Rome itself was nothing, a muddy settlement surrounded by hostile tribes, barely clinging to survival. So how did they go from that to building the most dominant empire the ancient world had ever seen? I used cutting-edge AI to reconstruct ancient Rome exactly as it appeared in 117 AD at the absolute height of imperial power. We're going to walk these streets, enter these buildings, and understand what made this civilization unstoppable. 5 million square kilometers, 50 million people, one city ruling them all. Let's step inside. This is the Basilica Julia, the largest law court in Rome. Picture this: 4 simultaneous trials happening at once, separated only by wooden screens. Lawyers shouting arguments, crowds packed 3 stories high on marble balconies, betting on verdicts like they're horse races. This wasn't some quiet courtroom, this was legal theater. The building stretched 101 meters long and could hold thousands of spectators. Julius Caesar started construction as a monument to his family name. After his assassination, Augustus finished it, turning his great-uncle's vision into reality. But here's what matters. Rome created the first professional legal system: written laws, public trials, the right to defend yourself. These weren't just Roman innovations, they became the foundation of Western legal tradition for the next 2,000 years. Walk out of the Basilica Julia and you're standing in the Forum Valley, surrounded by the accumulated power of 6 centuries. To your left, the Tabularium, Rome's state archive carved into the base of Capitoline Hill. Every law, every treaty, every census record stored in bronze tablets inside those walls. If you wanted to challenge the government, this is where you'd find the evidence. To your right, the Arch of Septimius Severus, celebrating military victories in the east. 23 meters tall, covered in detailed relief sculptures showing Roman soldiers defeating Parthian armies. And straight ahead, rising above everything else, the Temple of Saturn. This temple held Rome's treasury, the actual gold and silver that financed the empire. 8 massive granite columns, each one 11 meters high, imported from Egypt at enormous expense just to show the world that Rome could afford it. The temple also hosted Saturnalia, Rome's biggest festival. For 1 week, every December, social rules flipped upside down. Slaves dined with their masters, gambling was legal, people exchanged gifts. Sound familiar? That's because Saturnalia's traditions eventually merged into Christmas celebrations.
But the Forum wasn't just about money and power. It was also the site of Rome's darkest political moment. March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March. Julius Caesar walked into the theater of Pompeii, a massive complex just west of here. 23 senators surrounded him, 23 daggers. Caesar died on the floor, bleeding from multiple wounds. His body was carried back to the Forum, this exact spot. Crowds gathered, emotions exploded. Within hours, riots erupted throughout the city. Rome's republican government never recovered. Within 2 decades, Augustus transformed the republic into an empire, concentrating all power in himself. One assassination changed everything. Augustus knew how to consolidate power, but he also knew how to build. The mausoleum of Augustus dominated the northern Campus Martius, a circular tomb 87 meters in diameter, topped with a bronze statue of Augustus himself. When he died in 14 AD, his ashes were placed inside alongside those of his family members. But Augustus built something even more revealing nearby: the Ara Pacis, the Altar of Peace. Completed in 9 BC, this monument celebrated the Pax Romana, the Roman peace that Augustus claimed to have established after decades of civil war. The marble walls were carved with intricate scenes, Augustus and his family in religious procession, mythological founders of Rome, symbols of prosperity. The message was clear. Augustus didn't rule through fear, he ruled through stability, prosperity, and divine right. Whether you believed that propaganda or not, the Pax Romana was real. For 2 centuries, Rome's interior provinces enjoyed unprecedented peace and economic growth. But let's talk about what that peace actually bought. Cross the Tiber River and you'll find the Trans-Tiberim district, what we now call Trastevere. This was Rome's working-class neighborhood. Narrow streets, cramped workshops, the smell of leather tanneries and fish sauce factories. This is where immigrants from across the empire settled. Syrians, Egyptians, Jews, Greeks, all living side by side in one of the world's first truly multicultural cities. Walk into a typical street and you'd hear a dozen languages before you reach the corner. That diversity wasn't accidental. It was the engine that made Rome work. These workshops produced everything the empire needed: pottery, textiles, metalwork, all crafted by skilled artisans who'd learned their trades from masters across 3 continents. The Romans didn't invent most of these techniques, they imported them. Glass blowing from Syria, concrete from the Greeks, architectural innovations from everywhere. Rome's genius wasn't invention, it was integration. They took the best ideas from every culture they conquered and scaled them to imperial proportions. Speaking of scale, let's talk about the Baths of Caracalla. Completed in 216 AD, this complex covered 11 hectares, roughly the size of 16 football fields. It could accommodate 1,600 bathers at once. But calling it a bath is like calling the Pentagon an office building. Technically true, completely inadequate. The Baths of Caracalla were a complete leisure complex. You'd start in the changing rooms, then move through a carefully designed sequence. First, the gymnasium for exercise, then the warm room to open your pores, the hot room to really sweat. Finally, a shocking plunge into the cold pool to close everything up. Along the way, you could get a massage, a haircut, or a shave. You could browse the libraries, attend lectures, watch performances, meet business partners. The baths were where Roman society actually happened.
And here's the remarkable part. Entry cost almost nothing. 1 quadrans, the smallest bronze coin in circulation. Poor workers could afford it. The emperors subsidized these facilities because they understood something fundamental. If you keep the population healthy, entertained, and socially connected, they're much less likely to revolt. Bread and circuses, people call it dismissively, but it was brilliant social engineering. Give people what they need to survive, plus enough leisure to make life worth living, and you can maintain an empire for centuries. But let's be clear, this wasn't some benevolent utopia. Rome's prosperity was built on brutality. The slave markets told a different story. Located near the Forum, these markets processed thousands of human beings every week. Prisoners of war, debtors, children born into slavery, all bought and sold like cattle. Wealthy Romans might own hundreds of slaves, the truly rich, thousands. These people cooked the food, cleaned the houses, tutored the children, managed the businesses. The entire Roman economy depended on their unpaid labor. If you were enslaved in a wealthy urban household, you might eventually earn your freedom. If you were sent to the mines or the agricultural estates, you'd probably die there. The cruelty extended beyond economics into entertainment. The amphitheater Flavium, what we now call the Colosseum, opened in 80 AD. Emperor Vespasian built it on the site of Nero's private lake, a deliberate message: I'm giving back to the people what the tyrant took for himself. The structure was an engineering marvel. 3 stories of arches, each level in a different architectural style. Seating for 55,000 people, organized by social class. The emperor and senators on marble seats at ground level. Everyone else higher up, with the poorest citizens standing in the wooden top tier.
The games themselves were elaborate productions, exotic animals from across the empire, lions from North Africa, bears from Germania, crocodiles from Egypt, condemned criminals executed in elaborate staged scenarios, professional gladiators fighting in carefully matched pairs. The Romans developed an entire gladiatorial culture with specialized weapons, fighting styles, and celebrity athletes. Successful gladiators became wealthy and famous, but most died young. The casualty rate was staggering. Modern estimates suggest that over the Colosseum's 4 centuries of operation, hundreds of thousands of people and animals died in that arena. The Roman poet Martial described the opening games alone lasting 100 days and killing 5,000 animals. That level of violence, sustained for centuries, is almost incomprehensible. Yet Romans saw it differently. They believed this spectacle demonstrated Roman power and discipline. Watching a condemned criminal face a lion supposedly taught the audience about justice. Gladiatorial combat showed courage and martial skill. Animal hunts proved Rome's dominion over nature itself. We recoil from this violence. They celebrated it. Understanding that gap between their values and ours is essential to understanding Rome.
But not all Roman engineering served death. Let's talk about the aqueducts. Rome's water system was among the greatest infrastructure achievements in human history. 11 major aqueducts supplied the city, bringing fresh water from springs in the surrounding mountains. The Aqua Claudia, completed in 52 AD, stretched 69 kilometers from the Anio Valley. For the first 46 kilometers, the water channel ran underground or at ground level. But as it approached Rome, the terrain dropped, requiring massive elevated arches. These arches stood up to 28 meters high, carrying water in a stone-lined channel on top. The gradient was precisely calculated, just 30 centimeters of drop per kilometer. Too steep, and the water would erode the channel. Too shallow, and it wouldn't flow. Roman engineers got it exactly right, and sections of these aqueducts still stand today, 2,000 years later. The water didn't just go to public fountains. It fed the baths, flushed the public latrines, supplied the private homes of the wealthy, powered decorative fountains throughout the city, even created artificial lakes for mock naval battles in the arenas. Rome consumed more water per capita than most modern cities. In an age before electric pumps, before motors, before any kind of powered machinery, they moved millions of liters of water every day using nothing but gravity and brilliant engineering. This water enabled something remarkable: urban density. Rome in the 2nd century AD housed over 1 million people within its walls. That population density wouldn't be matched again in Europe until London in the 1800s. How do you house 1 million people with ancient technology? You build up. The insulae, multi-story apartment buildings, dominated the cityscape. Most stood 5 to 7 stories high, constructed from brick and wood, packed tight along narrow streets. The ground floor typically housed shops opening directly onto the street. Upper floors were divided into smaller apartments. The higher you lived, the cheaper the rent, but also no running water, no heat except portable braziers, and no escape if fire broke out. These buildings collapsed regularly. Fires swept through entire neighborhoods. Emperors passed laws limiting their height to 20 meters, but landlords frequently violated these restrictions because vertical space was so valuable.
Living in an insula meant constant noise. Neighbors arguing above you, workshops hammering below you, carts rumbling past at night, the only time wheeled traffic was allowed in the city center. No privacy, no quiet, entire families sharing single rooms. This was life for 90% of Rome's population. Meanwhile, the wealthy lived in spacious homes built around central courtyards with private wells, elaborate decorations, and slaves to manage every aspect of daily life. The inequality was stark and visible every day. Yet, despite this inequality, Roman citizenship meant something tangible. By the 2nd century AD, being a Roman citizen gave you legal protections. You couldn't be crucified. You had the right to appeal to the emperor himself. You could vote in elections, at least nominally. You could own property, serve in the legions, participate in public life. These rights expanded gradually over centuries. In 212 AD, Emperor Caracalla granted citizenship to nearly every free person in the empire. This wasn't pure generosity. It increased the tax base and created a shared identity across diverse populations. But it also meant that a merchant in Syria, a farmer in Gaul, and a soldier in Britain could all claim the same legal status. That shared citizenship helped hold the empire together. The military made that empire possible. At its peak, Rome fielded about 30 legions, roughly 150,000 professional soldiers, plus an equal number of auxiliary troops. These weren't temporary conscripts. They were career soldiers who enlisted for 25 years. The pay was decent, the retirement benefits, including land grants, were attractive, and military service offered the only reliable path to social mobility for poor citizens. Serve your time, survive, and you'd retire with a pension and a plot of land. This created a professional, disciplined military force, unlike anything else in the ancient world. The legions trained constantly: sword drills, formation practice, forced marches carrying full equipment, building temporary fortifications. Every skill a soldier might need in combat practiced until it became instinct. This training paid off. Roman legions defeated larger armies through superior discipline and tactics. They built roads as they marched, establishing infrastructure that would serve the empire for centuries. They constructed massive fortification walls, like Hadrian's Wall in Britain, stretching 117 kilometers across the entire width of the island. That wall, built between 122 and 128 AD, required moving millions of tons of stone. It included 17 major forts and numerous smaller installations, and it worked. For 3 centuries, it marked the northern boundary of Roman Britain. But the military wasn't invincible. In 9 AD, 3 Roman legions marched into the Teutoburg forest in Germania. Barbarian tribes led by Arminius, a Germanic chieftain who'd served in the Roman army, ambushed them. Over 3 days of fighting, approximately 20,000 Roman soldiers were killed. The commander, Publius Quintilius Varus, committed suicide. Augustus reportedly banged his head against the palace walls, shouting, "Varus, give me back my legions!" Rome never fully recovered those losses. The empire abandoned plans to conquer Germania beyond the Rhine. That defeat showed Rome's limits. They were powerful, but not unstoppable. Trade, not conquest, became increasingly important. Roman merchants sailed to India, bringing back spices, silk, and precious stones. They traded with China along the Silk Road. They established commercial networks throughout the Mediterranean and into northern Europe. This trade made Rome fantastically wealthy. The port of Ostia at the mouth of the Tiber River processed grain from Egypt, oil from Spain, wine from Gaul, exotic goods from everywhere. Massive warehouses stored these products. Merchant guilds regulated trade. Ship owners became rich, financing voyages. This commercial empire generated tax revenue that funded the legions, the public works, the grain dole, everything that kept Rome functioning. But all of this, every aqueduct, every road, every building, rested on one material: concrete. Roman concrete was a revolutionary innovation. They mixed volcanic ash from Pozzuoli with lime and seawater to create a material that actually hardened underwater. This allowed them to build harbor installations, bridge foundations, massive domes like the Pantheon. That dome, completed in 126 AD, spans 43 meters across with no internal supports, just a single opening at the top, the oculus, letting in light and rain.
Stand beneath it and you're experiencing the same space Romans experienced 1900 years ago. Modern engineers still study Roman concrete. Some of their structures, especially those built with seawater, have actually gotten stronger over time as the salt water triggers ongoing chemical reactions in the volcanic ash. We lost this technology after Rome fell and didn't rediscover it for over 1,000 years.
This engineering knowledge was practical, not theoretical. Romans didn't write scientific papers about concrete chemistry. They experimented, found what worked, and built with it. The same approach applied across Roman technology. They built the best roads in the ancient world, perfectly cambered for drainage, layered for stability, arrow straight across hundreds of kilometers. They developed central heating systems, hypocausts that channeled hot air beneath floors. They created the first large-scale postal service, allowing messages to travel the length of the empire in weeks. They standardized weights, measures, and currency across 3 continents. This practical approach to problems made Roman civilization efficient in ways that wouldn't be matched for over a millennium. Education reinforced these values. Wealthy Roman boys studied rhetoric, learning to argue persuasively in court or politics. They read Greek philosophy, Roman history, classic literature. They learned to speak and write in both Latin and Greek. Girls from wealthy families received education too, though more limited, focused on managing households and raising children. But literacy spread beyond the elite. Merchants needed to keep accounts. Soldiers needed to read orders. Tradespeople advertised their services with painted signs. Graffiti covered the walls of Pompeii, showing that even ordinary people could write. This widespread literacy, combined with a common language, allowed ideas to spread across the empire. Those ideas included new religions. In the 1st century AD, a minor Jewish preacher named Jesus was executed in Jerusalem, a relatively unimportant provincial city. His followers spread his teachings throughout the empire, using Roman roads, Roman cities, Roman infrastructure to build their movement. At first, Romans barely noticed. Christians were just another strange Eastern cult. But Christianity offered something novel, universal salvation, regardless of social status, achieved through faith rather than expensive sacrifices. This appealed powerfully to the poor and enslaved. Despite periodic persecutions, Christianity grew. By the 4th century, Emperor Constantine converted, making Christianity the empire's favored religion. Within a century, it became the official state religion, fundamentally transforming Roman civilization. This transformation had profound effects. Pagan temples were converted into churches or abandoned. The gladiatorial games were gradually suppressed, though they continued in some form into the 5th century. Christian values, emphasizing charity and the sanctity of life, sat uncomfortably with traditional Roman brutality. The religion that Rome initially persecuted eventually absorbed and transformed the empire itself. But by then, Rome faced existential threats. The 3rd century brought crisis, civil wars, economic collapse, plague, barbarian invasions. The empire fractured. Emperor Diocletian, ruling from 284 to 305 AD, split the empire into eastern and western halves, each with its own emperor, hoping this would make it more manageable. It didn't solve the fundamental problems. The Western Empire grew weaker. Barbarian tribes pressed the frontiers. In 410 AD, Visigoths sacked Rome itself. In 476 AD, the last Western emperor was deposed. The Western Roman Empire ended. But the eastern half survived, transforming into the Byzantine Empire, which would last another 1,000 years until Constantinople fell in 1453. And Rome's influence never really ended. The Catholic Church preserved Latin as its liturgical language. Roman law formed the basis for most European legal systems. Roman engineering techniques influenced architecture for centuries.
The concept of republican government, even though Rome spent most of its history as an empire, inspired revolutions in America and France. Every modern Western nation owes something to Rome. Walk through any major European city and you'll find Roman foundations, sometimes literally. London was founded as Londinium, a Roman settlement. Paris began as Lutetia. Vienna was Vindobona. Rome didn't just conquer territory, they built cities that still exist 2,000 years later. The roads they constructed still determine the routes of modern highways. The aqueducts they engineered inspired every subsequent water system. The architectural innovations they developed, the arch, the vault, the dome, became fundamental elements of Western architecture.
But perhaps Rome's greatest legacy is simply proving it was possible. Possible to organize millions of people in a single political system. Possible to maintain infrastructure across continental distances. Possible to create a shared identity among diverse populations. Possible to build something that would last centuries. Every empire since has learned from Rome's successes and failures, how to organize armies, how to collect taxes, how to maintain roads, how to keep populations fed and entertained, how to integrate conquered peoples, and crucially, how empires eventually fall when they grow too large, too corrupt, too reliant on military force instead of genuine prosperity. Rome lasted from 753 BC, according to legend, until 476 AD in the West. 1,229 years as a continuous political entity. No modern nation has matched that longevity. The United States is barely 250 years old. Rome governed successfully for longer than most civilizations have existed. That's not just impressive, it's extraordinary. So what made it possible? Infrastructure that enabled commerce, law that created predictable governance, military power that established security, cultural flexibility that absorbed new ideas, economic systems that created shared prosperity, at least for some, brutal suppression of anyone who threatened the system, and perhaps most importantly, a civic identity that transcended ethnicity or geography. Being Roman meant something. It meant rights, opportunities, participation in something larger than yourself. That identity survived the Republic's transformation into empire. It survived bad emperors, civil wars, economic crises. It only failed when the empire could no longer protect its citizens or maintain the systems that made Roman life possible. We rebuilt everything Rome created: apartments, stadiums, public baths, aqueducts, roads, law courts, representative assemblies. The technology improved, the scale expanded, but the fundamental concepts, how to organize urban life for millions of people, we learned from Rome. They solved those problems first. 2,000 years later, we're still using their solutions. That's not just history, that's the blueprint for civilization itself.